Hello, and welcome back to What Now on the threshold of life, death, and grief. And I'm here in the studio with one of my friends and colleagues,
Red Keating.
I'm Julie Brown, and David is away for this recording, so it's just Red and I, and with our special guest today, Kelley Raab, who is joining us. Welcome, Kelley.
Thank you.
Kelley, I'm going to quickly read a short bio and then we're going to jump into some discussion. So Kelley was born in Utah and grew up in Pennsylvania and New York. She attended Colgate University, where she completed a BA in biology. And then she went on to earn 3 graduate degrees, a Master's of Divinity from Chicago Theological Seminary, an MA from the University of Chicago Divinity School, and a PhD in religious studies from the University of Ottawa. She currently lives in the Ottawa area and she works part-time as a psychotherapist. And she's the author of nonfiction books, short stories, and children's books, gravitating towards characters who are different or feel like they don't belong. Her 2025 memoir, which we're going to talk about today, Who Am I Now? Reflections on Spirituality and Grief, delves into loss and grief and what keeps us going. Welcome.
Thank you.
And I guess I'll get the ball rolling here, Kelley. Who Am I Now is such a great title. So I wonder who you are now and what was the impetus for writing this book?
Well, I guess to talk about who I am now, we have to talk about who I was, or what the momentum was that led me to write the book, questioning who I am. And that was my mother and my mother's illness. My mother lived until almost 95, and she was in quite good health until around age 90. 91, I noticed that her memory was failing, and this coincided with the pandemic in 2020. So there was a long period where I couldn't visit, and during that period, she had to be moved into assisted living and then to memory care. And she passed away in April 2023. I was devastated by my mother's death. And I was trying to make sense of my life. And writing has always helped me. And particularly the last 10 years, where I've gravitated more towards short stories and personal pieces. So I had been doing some writing, which I referred to here and there in the book, about my father's death. And I needed to get it out. I guess there was a lot inside me I needed to get out. I was working with a grief counselor, and she encouraged that. I didn't intend to write a memoir and publish it, but I wanted to explore my spiritual beliefs. I've always been somewhat of a skeptic, and I needed to figure out what I believed because my mother had passed away. The book details that she raised me. She was always there for me. I might get a little teary-eyed here, but
That's welcome.
Yeah, she'd been part of my life for so many years. So I wanted to somehow stay connected to her. How can I stay connected to my mother? And that led me to spirituality and what is spirituality for me. And that's what led me to write the book. And then who am I now without my mother? That's all part of it.
Would it be fair, Kelley, to say that losing your mother kind of threw you into like an existential reckoning or a rumble around?
Oh, yes. Yeah, for sure. It did. And it also brought up all my previous losses, which I do delve into in the book, that I hadn't perhaps grieved or hadn't maybe dealt with in a way that I thought I had. But yes, it was a question of meaning, an existential reckoning, as you call it, is what does my life mean now without this primary attachment figure in it? And as I say in the book, when my mother became ill around 2020, But before that, I was involved in her life, and I would take her to appointments. Even though I lived 5 hours away, I was still pretty involved in her life. And so it gave me a purpose that then when she passed away, made me ask, well, what's my purpose now?
Mm-hmm.
I've heard similar echoes of similar kinds of questions from folks. Is the what is my purpose? Who am I now? You know, your father died before your mother, if I remember correctly. So that when your mother died, not only was there that sense of connection and purpose, but you had a very, I think, a change of identity. You're now an orphan.
Yeah.
And I don't know if you ever thought of it that way, but like, who am I without my lineage?
Yeah. Yeah. Definitely. I did feel like an orphan, and I do feel like an orphan.
Right.
Yeah. I've lost both my parents.
And that is something that really stood out for me in the book. And I think it could be really helpful if folks read it, because I think we sometimes don't give that kind of grief this space, right? When it's like, oh, my parent was elderly. And we know that at a certain age, you know, that death is coming or likely coming. And yet I've seen this experience and I've watched it in others. That feeling of being an orphan doesn't leave us, or like comes up for us regardless of our age. Right?
Oh, yeah.
And it's a word that I think most of us grew up thinking that we associate with people that are very young. But I've often felt when I ask that question, the way Red just asked it with you, that people really identify with it very strongly, regardless of age.
Yeah, I definitely did identify and do identify with being an orphan. My parents are gone. And I've done a lot of reading on grief. Some of the writers point out that once your parents are gone, then you're maybe the next.
Yeah.
And so then that does bring up the existential angst and, well, what is the meaning of my life in the time that I have left, however much that might be.
That's right.
That is such a poignant point. I don't know if you can say it like that. That when our parents are dead and gone, we are the next in line, and so mortality. There's no one blocking that. That the blockers are gone, and we realize that we are next in line if we look at it sort of generationally, and that death is a reality, and you know it then creates that sense of who am I, who do I want to be, who was I before, and a lot of questions about our identity and how we want to live our life.
Yeah.
How did your mother's death change, or did it change how you live your life now?
I think I've become more relationally oriented, and not right before my mother's death, but for much of my life, I was very achievement oriented. And
we can see that from your bio.
Well, yeah. Nobody does 3 degrees in religion if they're not looking for something. So I was achievement oriented, and it worked for me in academia. And even later, when I was a hospital chaplain, I had an academic appointment. And I retired from that. My mother became ill. And then you think, well, what was that all for? Is that really going to matter how many books I wrote or how many articles I published? I wrote in the end of my book, my mother didn't publish any books, or, she didn't achieve what somebody might think is, a gold medal in anything. But her life was very solid. And if I might say, she was very solid in who she was and what she stood for. And her values were very solid. And I really admired that about her. And as I say in the book, I think my father was rather achievement oriented. He was a physician and he did well in his profession. And I followed suit in terms of my achieving personality. But I think that's shifted. I think that's shifted a lot since getting to know my mother. since she passed away.
Going back to your education and your work experience, one would think that all of your education and then your work as a hospital chaplain, that you would have seen death a lot and worked with people who had died and families who were grieving. I don't know if in your work you had.
Well, I have a caveat there. I worked in a psychiatric hospital,
Okay.
not in a general hospital.
Okay.
So, no, I didn't see death
Right.
much. I worked with people with severe mental illness.
Right. Did you feel that you should have not had the reaction you did for your mother's death, given all of your sort of spiritual and religious education, that it should have been easier somehow?
Sort of. Yeah.
Was it a surprise that it wasn't?
Yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah, it was. I have read volumes on religion and spirituality and after-death beliefs, but it's not the same as facing your mother's death, reading about death and what people believe in different cultures. It's not the same as facing a loved one's death. You can have all the literature at your fingertips, but I think you're just thrown for a loop.
That's right.
Mm-hmm.
We have to go through that, don't we? That all the intellectual academic knowledge doesn't change just the fact that this is a human experience that we need to live through. And I was thinking about that. That's true for so many things. I think of like when I went through my cancer experience and I had some real trauma from that. I'm a trauma therapist. I do trauma like every day in my practice. But knowing about trauma and treating other people about trauma doesn't mean that I am in some way safe from developing trauma myself.
Yeah.
Or that I didn't need the same kind of things to help cope and the same support that my clients need with trauma. And it's the same for grief, that those of us sitting here having this conversation right now, we've all had loss. We will have more of it. Knowing lots about grief and being maybe literate in grief will in no way change our intensity of how we might feel about the loss of someone or a loss in some other way. We might be able to say, oh, I know what's happening here, right? Or this makes sense that I'm feeling this way, or I know this is very normal, but it doesn't change like the pain or the sadness, the sorrow of that.
No, it doesn't. You're never prepared. And in my work in the psychiatric setting, I did counsel people for grief. And I mentioned this in the book. I often used Kubler-Ross's 5 stages of grief, and we would talk about where they were and so forth. But then when my mother died, I had to reevaluate, and the grief counselor that I started working with suggested, well, there isn't a timetable. There are no set stages. Everyone grieves differently. It's very personal.
That's right.
And you have to see your way through. So my formula was thrown out the window, right? That there are no set stages. And there are, maybe as Alan Waldfelt says, mourning needs or things that help along the way. But even that, everybody has to find their own way and their own path. And that's so hard. That is so hard, to find your own path in the wilderness. Yeah, it's incredibly hard.
And I think something that happens is that we're on the path, but because we feel lost or it's unfamiliar, it's strange, we maybe don't know ourselves in this way, it can feel like we're not on the path, right? Like so often clients, like I feel like a lot of what my sessions are kind of offering reassurance of like, you're okay. Like what you're doing is okay.
Yeah.
It doesn't feel okay. Your pain doesn't feel okay to you, but you're okay in terms of how you're doing this. There's nothing wrong with you. There's nothing wrong with how you're doing this. There's nothing wrong with you 10 months from now with how it's showing up either.
Yeah. Yeah, exactly. And even when my father died when I was in my 30s, and I dealt with the grief in a totally different way, I I traveled and I tried to not think about it, and I got another job and I moved. And some would say, well, better to sit with it. But that's what I did then. I
Mm-hmm.
did something different when my mother passed. I sat with it, and both were okay. Both were how I dealt with grief.
Right. Right.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah, I have a couple of thoughts running through my head. Is it someone saying, you don't get to jump the queue. You've, no matter how much you know, no matter what your experiences are, grief is real, and you don't get to jump the queue and get to the end of it before. Not that there ever is an end of it, but that you don't get to that place where maybe life feels in better balance, and the tension between your grief and your life is lessened somewhat. I'm curious as to how did your spirituality evolve through your grief journey?
Yes, that's a good question. I didn't think about spirituality for a while, and I didn't know what to think about spirituality. I did go on a self-directed retreat about 4 months after my mother's death. It was just a coincidence that I was at a retreat center in Wisconsin while my husband was at an aviation event. And I spent that time just walking around and looking at the pictures. And I met with a priest. He said to me, "You're a seeker, aren't you?" And I thought, yes, I wasn't raised Catholic. I am a seeker, and I look anywhere. I think maybe I can find an answer. And he encouraged me to keep seeking and keep looking. And that was very helpful. That was very helpful. He didn't push me in any particular direction. He just encouraged me to keep seeking. So I think that was part of the impetus for the book, was to explore what were my spiritual beliefs now that my mother had passed. I wasn't sure what they were before she passed. I've explored a lot of different religions, and I've done a lot of meditation and been involved with a Buddhist group, but I've been involved with Christian groups as well. I think I honed a particular idea of spirituality. For me, has something to do with what's beyond the grave, or what's beyond our physical. Is there something beyond our physical lives? When we pass away, is there something? To me, that was the crux of spirituality, or that would be the crux of spirituality. And that's where I began exploring. In the book, I don't have definitive answers. I just have a grasp of something here and there. There are times that I sensed my mother's presence in the first couple of years after her death. I've performed rituals to try to get close to her. But I really desperately wanted to stay connected to my mother. And that was my impetus for exploring spirituality.
Could you tell us a little bit more about ritual? Because that was going to be one of my questions, and you nicely just brought it up yourself.
Okay.
What was the role of ritual in maybe your grieving process, and then maybe generally, what do you see the role of ritual as part of the process?
Well, people will generally think of the funeral as an important ritual after someone passes, and that was important, but it in no way put my angst to rest. It was more of an acknowledgement that my mother had died, and now what? So I set up a little altar in my house with her pictures. I'm looking over at it now, and I have a candle burning, and I would just sit there and think about her at times. I also established a little garden in my backyard that I visit. To me, these are rituals. Rituals are setting aside a time and a place to do something special, that you're creating a sacred place, a sacred time, a sacred space. So it could be in the context of a religion, but it could be your own private ritual. I went to a ritual the first December after my mother had passed in the city where she had lived, where she was remembered. So all of these helped me feel more connected to her and brought me some comfort. I don't know if that answers your question.
Like just the lighting of a candle, that's ritual.
Yeah.
If it's done with the intention, there's always intention in ritual, and if it's done with the intention, it doesn't have to be, a funeral. I mean, like you said, I see funerals as big, but when I'm at home, I can have my own little rituals that I do to remember and create that space. And it doesn't have to be, big,
No,
or difficult, or take a whole lot of planning, right?
no, or take a whole lot of time.
Yeah.
So on the anniversary of my mother's death, as well as on her birthday, I do some kind of a ritual. Again, I don't live near where she's buried. Otherwise, I'd probably go to the cemetery. But I buy flowers, or I cook a special food that she liked. I wear her jewelry.
Mm-hmm.
Those sorts of things that, as you say, are small and easy to do and don't cost a lot. But they're just a way to mark the occasion as a significant occasion in my life.
Yeah.
Yeah, I love that. I think there's, that's the continuing bond work, right? That we can do is through, it doesn't have to be done through ritual, but I love our conversation here because it really shows how simple it can be.
Mm-hmm.
I have a friend who I actually thought a lot about while I was reading your book around what the loss of her mother was like for her. And her mother made this like delicious strawberry pie. And so every year in strawberry season, she makes one for her family. And then she makes one to give to somebody else because that was her mother. Her mother was a really generous, community-minded, helpful person. So it's like, this is a ritual, right? Every year. And it of course, she thinks about her mother, and then she often tells a story about her mother as she gives away that pie. Like, that's a beautiful ritual that is very personal. So yes, we have these rituals that can be more like events that are bigger, like a funeral or a celebration of life or something like that. Some people go to a mass or something, but then there can be these other really like personal ways that we remember people. And really what we're doing is like, we're making space for them to still like live here with us. And we're making space about our relationship and our connection to them.
Yeah. And we're also passing down their values, that we're also establishing a legacy.
That's right.
A legacy of, making a special pie every year. Or I mentioned sewing in my book as a legacy. So it doesn't have to be setting up a scholarship fund or, inheriting a lot of money, but some way of passing down who that person was that we loved so much, and keeping them alive and keeping them close to us.
Mm-hmm. What's ringing through my head as you guys are talking is that also, I think sometimes we often abdicate a ritual to somebody who we see as of greater importance, a priest, a rabbi, shaman, whoever, that somebody else does ritual, and that it's a bit foreign for me to think I'm leading a ritual or I'm performing a ritual, but that you can, it's giving yourself permission to say, I can create my own ritual, and I don't have to sort of farm that task out or that responsibility, and I have that power to mark that time, to create that space, to make holy or sacred the act that I'm putting my intention into.
Yeah, for sure. You don't have to be a shaman, a priest, or a minister to perform a ritual. Anybody can perform a ritual and have the intended effect.
But I think sometimes we feel awkward, or we feel like we don't have that the power or the wherewithal or the permission to be that person that leads in that
Maybe
way.
it's permission. Yeah, maybe it's permission that we think we need.
Something I appreciated that you spoke to in the book, this idea being an orphan and, the loss of parents, but especially mothers, is that sometimes part of our work can be learning how to mother ourselves. And what do we mean by that? We mean like, how do we care for ourselves, right? So
Yes.
if we were lucky enough to have a mother that seen us, that attended to our needs, that loved us, and of course, if we weren't lucky enough, that's a whole other layer of that grief process.
Yes.
But part of what then we're learning to do, which is why I think, regardless of any age, that it can be such a significant loss, is what is it like to be in the world without that love, without that care, without being seen like that anymore? And now, how do I cultivate that in my own life, whether it's for myself or inviting other people in who have some of those qualities? So I can still, it's different, but I can still feel mothered, meaning I can still feel cared for, attended to, attuned to.
Yeah, that was a real challenge for me to think, well, now that I'm an orphan, how can I continue my mother's love for myself?
Mm-hmm.
What does that mean?
Mm-hmm.
So I gave a few examples in the book when I had injured myself and I didn't want to acknowledge I was injured. And she said, Kelley, you have to get an x-ray, and pushed me to get an x-ray. And then I got an x-ray and I had broken a bone in my hand. And it was my mother who really pushed me to care for myself. So it can be a challenge, I think, to do that for oneself now, is to think. And I have to be very intentional. It's like, okay, what would my mother say about this? Did she think I should take the day off, or does she think I should, get an x-ray, or even, voice concern about this? I have to be very intentional, because otherwise I may not do it. But I think that is a very important piece when one's mother, or if the dad was the primary parent, dies, is how do you implement the self-care that they instilled in you? How do you continue that?
Can you speak about spiritual bypassing? You speak about that in the book, and I think that's something that shows up and that can interfere also with how we grieve, or the space we give others, the permission we give other people in grief.
So statements like, your mother's in a better place, or there's a reason for everything. Yeah, I was fortunate. I didn't hear much of that when my mother died. And so people didn't try to console me with, even my religious friends didn't try to console me with a religious platitude. But I think that can happen. And maybe people do it because they hope that the griever will feel better, that it'll help the griever. But I don't think it does. Do you?
No. And in fact, I think that this is sometimes why people can have part of their existential reckoning can be when someone dies, is their relationship to their religious spiritual beliefs, is because sometimes those thoughts were comforting prior to the death, right? It's like, oh, well, we're all going to be reunited in heaven, or, it's a peaceful, it's a loving place. Mom's gone to be with God, or whatever. And that can actually kind of sometimes hold some comfort as we move through life with the idea of death, right? We're into terror management theory here, aren't we, Red? But then this is sometimes part of our work through the grieving process, is that we find that, oh, but that doesn't actually allow me, or doesn't change my experience necessarily of their loss in my life.
Yeah. I think one can believe that they're in a spiritual realm, but it doesn't diminish the pain that they're not in our earthly realm anymore. It doesn't take away from what we have to go through in grieving, and that is facing the reality that they're gone. We'll never see them again. We'll never talk to them again. That it's this big void, even if one does have the belief that they're in a different realm. It's still not the same realm we're in.
That's right.
You still have to get used to living with the absence of that person in your life
Yeah.
in a physical, earthbound way. And
Yeah.
I think we can still have a relationship. And that's what you were talking about. Spirituality is that connection with people beyond the physical. But we still have to go through the process that we're still here and we still have the emotions and feelings that are of sadness, of loss. And we have to sort of find our way through in order to be able to sort of, I think, fully re-engage in our day to day. And you said something that I really liked, that, and swinging almost back to the beginning when you started talking, you're talking about having that sense of what's my purpose now that my mother has died. And then somewhere in the book, you make the reference to the fact that purpose is found in the day to day. Right. And so have you found your purpose since your mother's death, or are you still on the path of discovery?
Well, I'll always be on the path of discovery because that's my nature. I have found a purpose with a small p, I think.
Right.
Even in writing the book, that gave me a purpose this past year, the past couple of years. It's given me a purpose. What comes after that will be another purpose.
Right. And then when you say in the day to day, what kinds of things were you thinking about when you were saying that purpose is found in the day to day? Because I think you're right. There's a big P purpose and maybe there's a little P purpose.
Well, what can I do today that might help somebody else, or to make the environment a little bit better, or to take care of myself, as Julie was saying, to mother myself? Can I enjoy this meal, even though my mother has died? You know, I mentioned dialectical thinking. There's happiness and sadness in the same day. Can I find some joy in my day, even though I'm still grieving?
And I think that comes with time, but it is so important to understand that those two things that might seem diametrically opposed can exist in the same space at the same time. We can be happy and sad at the same time.
Yeah.
Right? I had a wonderful story that I heard recently about a person who was taking care of their spouse, and being a caregiver to them was an important role. And it became, as time went by, even more important and part of the identity and what that person did every day. And then their partner had died, and recently they were out in a grocery store, and there was somebody who couldn't reach up on the high shelf, and so they just reached up and what were you trying to get, and got it down for them. And he said they just made him feel so good to be able to help another person. And it's like, yes, even in the midst of your grief, there's that moment, there's that tiny little joy that is still present, even though you're grieving. And I think we have to be able to be in a place where we can acknowledge those and see those in the day to day, that purpose and meaning still exists even when we're grieving.
Yeah. And I try every day to find something to be thankful for. Before I go to bed, I think, what am I grateful for today? It might be a conversation I had with somebody, a walk I took, or in your example, maybe helping somebody with something small. And that helps me too. It helps me reframe my day, that, well, there was meaning in that day after all.
Yeah.
I like the idea of talking about purpose as a small p purpose, because often when we use that word, I think it I think it conjures up this idea of like big, you know, I'm pulled, I have a vocation, I'm passionate about something. But it really can be in the day to day. It's like, oh, I was helpful today. And
Mm-hmm.
that felt meaningful to me, right?
Mm-hmm.
Or I gathered people together today and we shared a nice meal. And I think that felt good for them and it felt good for me. And that was my purpose for today.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah. And your purpose tomorrow might be something else.
Yeah, I like that. I like that. Kelley, as we begin to wrap up our conversation, is there anything that it feels, I mean, there's lots of things from your book that we haven't covered, but is there anything that just feels particularly important to you today that you want to make sure that we speak to or we give a little space to?
Well, I think it's that when you suffer a loss, that you will also revisit your previous losses.
Yes.
Mm-hmm.
And I was cued into that by Anderson Cooper and his podcast when he spoke about losing his 95-year-old mother, and then memories of his dad who had died when he was young and his brother who had also died came up. And that was a very important podcast for me because I did think initially, well, why am I so upset? You know, my mother was elderly and she had dementia. And then I was thinking about my father, and I had a trauma as a child, and how maybe I hadn't quite grieved those, or I was still grieving those. Even though I did grieve them, maybe I was still grieving them, and I will always grieve. And I think that's what my grief counselor suggested, that we never get over a grief or move on, or it's never something we can just say, oh, I'm finished with that. We're never finished with it. It'll come back to me the rest of my life. It'll be there for me the rest of my life. And there may be times when I don't think about these deaths or the trauma, but there'll be times when I will. And that's okay.
Yeah, I appreciate that about your book too, is this idea that present day loss triggers historical loss. And that's just so common and we should expect it. But people are often caught by surprise in that, you know, and sometimes I'll find people will say like, I thought I'd done that. And it's like, oh no, you did grieve that then. And it's coming up now and that's normal. And we need to make space for that too.
Yeah.
And it's not like you didn't do all the work back then. It's just that here's some
right.
new work to do now, right?
That's right.
Yeah.
And there will be another set of work to do somewhere in the future. What that will look like, you don't know, but we carry our grief with us because we carry the people that we've loved in our hearts. And so when, you know, one grief reminds us, or one death reminds us of all the other deaths that have come, because it's not about, like you said, it's not about getting over or getting beyond. It's about learning how to live with and incorporate those losses and that grief into our daily life.
Yeah. And I think that brings me back when you asked about how my mother's death had changed me. The more relational orientation has been one that I've embracing, and versus the achievement orientation, because I have my degrees on the wall behind me, but where I'm looking is at the candle where my mother's pictures are. You know, these degrees, they're meant something at the time, but the pictures of her and the candle, that's more important.
Right.
And that just makes me think about, I used the word existential reckoning in the beginning, and that's a phrase that I often use for myself and with clients, that if we stay in the reckoning, if we stay in the rumble of it, it often acts like a compass to us. And it's almost like it writes our course around like, all right, what is important? And what are the kind of the guides that I want to let kind of guide me to this next part of my life. And sometimes it is not the things that were guiding us in the past. And so it's
Yeah.
hard work. It's uncomfortable. It can be distressing to be there. But when we stay in it, it acts like a compass or like a lighthouse, kind of pointing us towards maybe like our real true north for ourselves.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Our true north, our authentic selves,
Yeah.
or what truly gives us meaning.
Yeah. Lines us with our values.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah. Thank you, Kelley, for this conversation.
Well, thank you.
Thank you.
I feel like, I got to read an earlier draft of your book. And one of the things that I really appreciated about it is it's very accessible. It's a really, really easy read. And you do a really nice job delving into some of the key points that many of the writers in the grief field have written about. And so it's all kind of there, reference, kind of educating us, but in this like really very easy to read, really easy to take in. So thank you for your contribution to that in our field.
Well, you're welcome. That was my hope, is that I could use some of my academic training to bring grief ideas to people. But then I had to use my own story.
Yeah.
So that was my reference point, my own story.
Yeah. Thank you.
Yeah, thanks.
You're welcome.
Take care.
Thank you for listening to What Now? On the Threshold of Life, Death, and Grief. What Now is produced in partnership with Hospice Peterborough, dedicated to providing compassionate care and support to individuals and families facing life-limiting illness and loss. What Now is recorded at Thin Spaces Studio in Peterborough, Ontario. Special thanks to Paradise Garage for providing the music. Technical support is provided by Sean Heichert and audio engineering by Kevin Fleming. More episodes of What Now are available for free on most major podcast platforms. If you've found value in our conversations, please support us by following, leaving a 5-star review, and sharing with your friends and loved ones. If you'd like to support the essential work of Hospice Peterborough, please consider visiting hospicepeterborough.org/donate. Your contribution helps us to continue to provide vital care and support. Until next time, may you find peace and comfort on your journey.